Good morning again. Our next panel is Driving Leadership Initiatives Impact Women and Youth Around the Globe. So for this panel, I want to invite Margarita Palau Hernandez, who was nominated by the President of the United States to serve as United States representative to the United Nations General Assembly session with the rank of ambassador. Ms. Palau Hernandez is founder and chief executive officer of Hernández Ventures, a privately held enterprise involved in Spanish media, business, and real estate ventures in the United States and Mexico. Ms. Palau Hernandez is currently a director of Herbalife Nutrition, a company operating global nutrition organization in over than 9 countries. It's our pleasure to be with you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today to celebrate our second LEAD Summit. My name is Maggie Palau Hernandez. I'm class of 1985. I'm proud to be a member of the Board of Advisors of the law school, and I'm one of the founding board members of LEAD. So I'm thrilled to be here. I will be your moderator and your panelist today. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and ask our panelists to come up. Mary and Nancy and Shiu. There you are. Good. Wonderful. If you could all come up and take a seat, that would be terrific. Our first panelist today is Mary Rodriguez, who has just traveled all the way from France to be here today. So thank you very much for coming. Mary is a 1988 graduate of UCLA School of Law and a 1985 graduate of the University of San Diego, something which we have in common. We went to the same college and same law school. Mary is the first woman and the first American to serve as general counsel for Interpol. Interpol is the world's largest international organization with 194 member countries. Mary is experienced in international law, civil and criminal practice and litigation, administrative law, negotiation of international agreements and treaties. Mary is fluent in English and Spanish with knowledge of French. She skillfully operates in international, multicultural, and multidisciplinary environments. Mary, your job sounds incredibly interesting. Can you tell us, what does Interpol do and what is its purpose?
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And after having graduated from UCLA 30 years ago, this is my first time back. And I must say, it's been wonderful to be here and see how much the law school has changed. So, thank you so much, and thank you for including me in this wonderful event. Now, to answer the question on what does Interpol do and what is its purpose, Interpol is not like you see it in the movies. We don't have Interpol agents with international jurisdiction that go around arresting people anywhere in the world. It is actually something much more, in some ways, I guess, mundane, but still very interesting. It is the oldest international police communications network. And it has, as Maggie said, 194 member countries with its headquarters in Lyon, France. And we operate a number of databases where police can get information about international crime. Databases such as one very famous and important one for child exploitation to help rescue victims of child exploitation, where police can share information and through very secure channels determine where the victims are and actually help local police identify and rescue victims. We also operate one of the most well-known international alert systems for fugitives, and that is something known as the Notice and Diffusion System, the Red Notice being one of the most famous products that Interpol does. So it's very much a way of just communicating with police, connecting police in all of its member countries, and having providing assistance to police so that they can do their work, all within an international framework and within the framework of Interpol, which is an independent international organization that operates under its own laws and under its own international framework, which would be not within any national laws. So all of the members operate within their laws, but Interpol operates within its own framework.
Thank you. So Mary, how does someone go about getting a job at Interpol? And what do lawyers do at Interpol?
Well, getting a job there are two ways to work at Interpol. We have a headquarters, and most people who work at Interpol work at the headquarters, which is comprised of about 1,000 people. It's actually quite small given the reach of the organization. And employees there are either seconded from their national governments or they are hired on contract. I am a seconded official, so I actually work for the U.S. Department of Justice, and the U.S. Department of Justice has me basically on loan to Interpol to serve as the general counsel for a number of reasons. One is that it helps the United States to have someone from the United States helping Interpol function better and make sure that all of the work that is done there is done with people with the proper expertise. That indirectly benefits the United States and United States law enforcement and the law enforcement community and then the citizens of all the various countries. Another way that people can work at Interpol is to actually apply and be hired for a position there. And we have a number of people who are from all over the world who occupy a number of different positions: lawyers, analysts, police officers. Those people can apply directly and be hired on a contract and then can serve there anywhere from 2-3 years, depending on what the needs of the organization are.
Thank you. What's your favorite part of your job?
Well, I'd say the favorite part of my job is also the most challenging. And because I operate in a very diverse environment, both culturally and also in terms of the disciplines that we have at Interpol. So one of the things that makes it very interesting is the fact that you operate with people who come from very different cultural backgrounds. And some of them have a very different approach to the law and to the legal profession and to the rule of law. And just being able to make sure that we can work together to accomplish the missions of Interpol, help police in all the different countries, and then help also victims is something that can be challenging at times because of the different approaches. We don't just operate with common law or civil law systems. We also work with colleagues from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, and you can see a variety of different legal systems in place. It makes it incredibly interesting, very enriching, but also very challenging at times, because coming from the U.S. Department of Justice, I'm used to working with police on a team, and we work together to gather evidence and develop a case, where in many other countries, the police do their work very independently and then present it to the prosecutors. So one of the things that I did at Interpol is we established a task force to review all of the notices and diffusions before they get published. And that one is multidisciplinary and multinational and multilingual. So this is a way to try to force disciplines to work together, to recognize their different skills, and to develop real teamwork so that the work can actually get done. So that's been very exciting to me, both working on the differences and also the similarities that we have, which is achieving a common mission.
Your job seems fascinating, and yesterday you told me about how there are different schedules during the day. Everyone takes lunch from 12 to 2, which is somewhat mandatory, and you initially weren't doing it and then decided, well, I might as well join.
Well, one of the things that's been a benefit in some ways about working in France is that and coming from workaholic Washington, it took me some adjusting to basically blend into the environment there. But one of the things, as Maggie said, it's true. Every day from 12 to 2, everyone stops and has lunch. And in some ways, when I first got there, I thought it was crazy. I was like, how can we have work to do? I'm used to working at my desk, and sometimes people would give you dirty looks as you walk out the door to go get your bag of lunch. You know, it was crazy. And here, people really take a break, have lunch, use the lunch hour as an opportunity to continue to do work, to network, to discuss what's happening. And it's also a way to actually have some clarity in your mind and then come back and get back to work. We do work until about 7:30 or 8 o'clock on a regular basis. So it does make up for it. But it is hard sometimes not to stop and have lunch because, one, they're very strict about the lunch hours. You can't get lunch after 2, so if you don't go, that's it. So I learned that the hard way. But one of the things I think would be just important in an event like this is that one of the things that I've done since I've been at Interpol is really to promote the role of women in the legal profession at Interpol in a male-dominated environment. It is very much still, policing is still very much dominated by males, and many times I find myself to be the only woman, and certainly the only woman of color, in many meetings. And so in my office, I've hired a number of women. I've promoted women into leadership positions. I have 4 assistant directors. 2 of them are women, and one of them is a woman of color who has one of the most important responsibilities, which is to run the task force. And I look for opportunities to help women showcase their talents in occasions where we have, well, before our General Assembly, which has over 1,000 participants a year, my office always has to give presentations, and I always make sure that I have at least 1 or 2 women from my office giving presentations. I also give them opportunities to present to our executive board or to our Secretary General, just so that they can see, the rest of the organization can see how important it is that women be taken seriously and they can be seen not just as people who are there in a supporting role, but people who they can trust, who they can go to. And it's had the effect of really helping my office become much closer to the police and with their work. Because at Interpol, it was very much a police-dominated organization where the lawyers were viewed somewhat with suspicion. And since I've been there, we've worked very hard to make the lawyers become part of the team and show the police that we're there to support them.
Well, Mary, thank you. It's fascinating to hear everything that you have to say, and we're absolutely thrilled that you're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our second wonderful panelist is Nancy Mintie. Nancy graduated from UCLA School of Law in 1979 and is the founder and executive director of Uncommon Good, a nonprofit community development organization established in 2000. Uncommon Good offers education, health, urban farming, and environmental programs for low-income students and families in Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties. It also operates an educational loan repayment assistance program for health professionals working in underserved areas. Nancy is also the founder and was executive director of the Inner City Law Center, a nonprofit legal and social services organization in Los Angeles, Skid Row. Nancy has received numerous awards for her work from entities such as the American Bar Association, the California State Bar Association, U.S. Congress, UCLA, and UCLA School of Law. She was also honored on Capitol Hill. Nancy is going to tell us a little bit about herself and Uncommon Good.
Thank you, Maggie. And good morning, everyone. As Maggie has explained, I've spent my life working with 2 groups of people who are largely feared and abhorred in this country, and that would be the homeless and destitute refugees and immigrants from Central America and from Mexico. And some people have asked me, well, why? Why would you want to do that? And, if I were to answer in one sentence, what has been so rewarding about working with these folks, I would say it's because they are the people of no masks. Masks, of course, are those personas that our egos put on to make us, more interesting and to look more important. And the very poor, even if they wanted to hide behind a mask, they couldn't because it would be obvious. You could see right through it. If someone's very destitute, it's obvious, and it's obvious that they're a nobody in this society. And yet, here's the thing, of course, no mask is as beautiful as the human being underneath it. And if the human spirit shines forth unimpeded, people are so very beautiful. We see this in babies, of course, or in the faces of saints like a Mother Teresa. But you can also see this in the face of a homeless person or in the face of an immigrant with just the shirt on her back, because there's no mask that gets in the way. One of the ways that I've seen this beautiful human spirit shine forth from people who are very poor is in their generosity. You know, statistically, the very poor give a greater percentage of what they have than any other group. They give from their lack and not their surplus. And also their compassion. You know, they've suffered so much that many of them are very compassionate people. And in fact, the most beautiful single act of human compassion I have ever seen was performed by a homeless woman who used to live behind my office. And I wish I had time to tell you the story because it's so beautiful, but I just have a few minutes, so I need to press on. Now, of course, I'm not saying that all homeless people are saints. I am not saying that poverty is ennobling. Of course not. You know, I've spent my life fighting the scourge of poverty. But what I am saying is that very often, very poor people are also very good people. And it's an honor to know them and to serve them. And it makes me sad that we're afraid of them in this country when it would be so easy, you know, just to help them. You know, psychologists say that there are only two root emotions. You know, there's fear and there's love, and that all other emotions stem from these two. You know, and for me, the great tragedy of our country is that we have chosen fear. We've chosen to be so afraid. You know, we spend an enormous amount of money every year in our country on military. Congress came out with a report in December saying that by 2024, we'll be spending $1 trillion a year on defense. And if you put those $1 trillion end to end in $1 bills, you'd have a path from here to the sun. You know, it's an astronomical figure that we spend every year. And here's the thing, you know, we don't have any enemies. You know, no country has attacked us since 1941, probably before anyone in this room was born. You know, so what are we buying with this $1 trillion? Well, we are currently drone bombing people in 7 different countries, and we're involved in boots-on-the-ground combat in 14 of those different countries. I read a report that came out of the UN last month, and one of the facts that just jumped out at me and broke my heart was that in Afghanistan alone, in 2018 alone, American bombs and bullets have killed 951 civilians. And of course, many of those are women and children. And since 9/11, American bombs and bullets have killed over 500,000 people in just 3 of the countries where we're at war. And I've stopped asking people if they can name all of those countries because nobody ever can. You know, we really don't understand, you know, what our tax dollars are doing. And the great irony of all of this, of course, is it hasn't made us any safer. It's simply fueled resentment against us around the globe. You know, of course, if another country were drone bombing us, we wouldn't be very happy about it either. And, you know, it doesn't take much to deter from being attacked. You know, let's take a country in the news today, little tiny North Korea with a tiny little military capacity compared to the United States. And they've managed to fend off, you know, the world with that tiny bit of military spending. And yet we have these monstrous defenses, which are but foolish guardians, you know, of our mad illusions of security. And if we could just wake up from this nightmare of fear and choose love instead, we would have hundreds of billions of dollars every year to spend on health care, on education, on housing the homeless, on clean energy, on our infrastructure, even on giving aid to other countries so that desperate asylum seekers don't come up here, you know. And is this a pipe dream? Or is it possible? Well, of course it's possible. You know, most of the other developed countries of the world spend the vast majority of their treasure on their people and their needs and not on war making. So what would be my proposal to make a better world for women and children in this country and abroad? Well, it's very simple, and it's something that everyone in this room could do. And my proposal would be that each of us asks just 1.5 questions of every person who runs for Congress or for president and who asks for our vote. And that question would be, are you willing to reduce military spending to fund human needs and environmental needs? And if so, by how much? Now, if Americans start asking that simple question, we could begin to shift away from this unconscious support, this unquestioning, blind support of pouring all of our treasure into preparing for war and waging war. You know, we're all attorneys, we're all good at interrogating people, so I would hope that some of you would join me in this little civic exercise. Because if we don't, you know, if every year, if we keep pouring more and more money into this monstrous military machine and starve our human needs and our environmental needs, you know, we're going to destroy ourselves. So my question is, why not use this wealth to create a heaven on earth instead? Now, is this a pie in the sky idea? Now, come on, I'm an old crusty litigator. I don't do pie in the sky. This is eminently doable, and we have the means if we consciously choose to invest our wealth in love and life instead of fear and death. And so that's my proposal for how to make a better world for women and children, and even for men, too.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Our third wonderful panelist, Shiu-Ming Cheer, is Shiu-Ming graduated from UCLA School of Law Epstein Program in Public Interest Law and Policy in 2000. She is a senior staff attorney and field coordinator at the National Immigration Law Center. The National Immigration Law Center is one of the leading organizations in the United States exclusively dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of low-income immigrants. Shiu-Ming focuses on challenging immigration enforcement, promoting access to legal status, and integrating a field strategy into issues addressed at the National Immigration Center. She has a long history of involvement in social justice, organizing projects, campaigns, and coalitions. Shiu-Ming, I have a question for you. What is one of the biggest issues that you deal with in your work that affects women?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here. And as you heard, I work in the world of immigrant rights, which in the last few years has definitely been on the national consciousness, I think, more than it ever has been since I've been practicing. And so within the world of immigrant rights, there are many issues that affect women. If you look at patterns of migration, increasingly women as well as children are migrating to the US. Most of the time due to many of the global factors that Nancy was talking about in terms of the US involvement in wars or in economic policies that fuel migration. Also, when I think about the people that I had represented who were in immigration detention, they were predominantly men, but the calls I would get would be from women, their loved ones, who'd be very concerned about what was happening to the father of their children or the primary breadwinner of the family. And when that person got deported, it would often be the woman who would be here and forced to be the primary caregiver to their children. Also in the area of workers' rights, it's interesting, we had done some work around what's called no-match letters, which are letters that the Social Security Administration will send out to people telling them that their name does not match what the SSA has on record for them, the name and Social Security number. And those letters would disproportionately actually go to women because often women might have changed their name after they got married or might have made some other change to their name. And so it was often women who received these letters indicating that perhaps they were not authorized to work. And this was an issue we had focused on because often employers had used it as a reason to really try to fire some workers that they thought might not be documented. So I think just across the board within immigrant rights, when you look at the issue, it is an issue that definitely has an impact on women.
Thank you. And in terms of strategy, what direction or on what issues would you like to see the National Immigration Center focus on to address these matters?
Yeah, maybe for that answer, I'll make it a little more abstract. I think a lot of the reason why we haven't made as much progress on immigrant rights as maybe we could have or should have is because there is not a larger overarching vision for what we want that work to look like, or how we talk about migrants. So much of the work has just been tied to asking for policy, mostly on the federal level, in the form of comprehensive immigration reform, which is extremely limiting because every federal bill we've seen has basically tried to cut off immigrants from health benefits and other public services. It's also ramped up the deportation of immigrants. So I think by focusing on a federal solution, we've really locked ourselves in, and what we actually need is a larger overarching vision of how immigrants are already an integral part of the US. I think we also need to really focus more on changing people's hearts and minds, because we don't get that far with just policy on paper if people don't actually believe that all immigrants deserve equal rights and due process. So really focusing on changing people's perception of immigrants, recognizing that immigrants are our neighbors, our teachers, fellow students, and starting from that place rather than starting from a place of policy. And I think the other thing I would say is I think we actually need to be a lot bolder in our asks. I was really happy last year when people started to talk about abolishing ICE, about questioning whether an institution such as ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, actually has any kind of legitimate role and function to play. So basically opening up that possibility that we don't need to just limit ourselves to tinkering at the edges or pushing for reforms. We can actually push for something much bigger and sweeping, which is to get rid of a really oppressive, harmful institution altogether.
So make it a little lighter. What is your favorite part of your job?
Sure. So the favorite part of my job is I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of groups as part of different coalitions. Get to work with groups that are challenging mass incarceration, that are working on criminal justice issues, working on health access issues. I get to work with educators and organizations of teachers. So I think that's what I like most about my job, that I often get to interact with a lot of other people and to think about how we can, going back to this idea of how do we shift the perception of immigrants, how we can reach out more broadly to other people outside of the immigrant rights movement to really be our allies and to be our champions in terms of shifting the public perception and narrative around immigrant rights.
Well, Shiu-Ming, thank you so much for being here today and for speaking to us. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. So I'm your fourth panelist, and what we're going to do is we're going to take questions at the end if we have time. But before I get started, I just want to take a moment to say how important UCLA School of Law has been to me my entire life. Virtually every important decision I've made in my life has been influenced by my legal learnings and my critical thinking skills developed here at the law school. I was introduced to my husband by an LLM student here who was I'm very much like LLM students. We've been married 32 years. I never would have met him otherwise. He's here in the audience as well, as is my middle son, who is also a lawyer. He's here joining us. Since graduating from law school, I went to work at a law firm for 3 years, and then I veered into business. I started my own company called Hernandez Ventures. It's now been in existence since 1988. And I'm on the board of 2 public companies. One is called Herbalife Nutrition, which operates in 90 countries, and ALJ Regional Holdings, which is a holding company that operates completely different types of businesses. Most recently, I've had the honor of representing my country at the United Nations. And when I first got to the United Nations, I thought, wow, there's so many issues to focus on, so many humanitarian issues. There's migration, poverty, hunger, children, women's empowerment, disarmament. There are legal issues such as oceans and the law, the international criminal courts, the residual mechanism for people who have committed crimes against humanity in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. All three of which I spoke about at the United Nations General Assembly. So for me to decide, I finally decided that for me to focus, what I would focus on, I decided that since I was born and raised in Mexico and educated there through the first 2 years of college, and Spanish is my first language, I decided to focus on Venezuela, Cuba, Central America, and the caravan, the Central American caravan traveling through Mexico. I started by scheduling meetings with the different ambassadors, United Nations ambassadors to Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, amongst others. My main goal was to build relationships, to understand what issues were important to them, and to and then convey what issues were important to us, and also to understand what effect the migrant population was having on their countries. With Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay, with those ambassadors, the discussion centered around the more than 3 million Venezuelans who had migrated out of the country and the condition of each wave of those migrants. We talked about the first wave of migrants that traveled from Venezuela to Colombia, and they were the very wealthy, so for them it was very easy to move from one country to another and establish themselves. The second wave of migrants who traveled to Colombia, which is where most of them have traveled, were the immigrants that were the professional class, the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants, the teachers, the economists. For them, it was a lot more difficult to establish themselves in another country, to start up a new career, to take their children to school there. So the third class and the last wave of immigrants was the poorest to arrive. They basically had nothing. They were not vaccinated, so they brought with them all sorts of health issues. They were bringing diseases into the countries that had already been eradicated. They were arriving at the border's doorsteps, starving to death. When the conversations continued with the ambassadors of South America regarding Venezuela and what to do, those conversations ensued for the remainder of the fall. With the Mexican, Honduran, and Guatemalan ambassadors, the discussion centered around the current Central American caravan that was traveling through Mexico. The Honduran and Guatemalan ambassadors said they were not involved with the caravans and that they had been organized by non-governmental networks, some criminal and some not criminal. And they were reaching out to people through social media. The migrants traveling through Mexico to the United States are very similar to the last wave of migrants that entered Venezuela. They were very, very poor. Most recently, I visited the caravan traveling through Mexico. I went to San Luis Potosí, Mexico, which is a city outside of Mexico City. By the time I met up with the caravan in San Luis Potosí, the group had been traveling 1,500 miles by foot. So if you can imagine walking from here halfway to New York, it's a long way. It's 3,000 miles to New York. And if you can imagine if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere and you wouldn't know what to do, this is where the migrants are walking, with nothing but a backpack and maybe a bottle of water on them. While the Mexican government is allowing the caravan members to enter Mexico, one thing I want to point out is that they are not providing law enforcement during the journey. It is a very unsafe journey. Women are sexually assaulted. There is lots of violence during the trek. But let me speak more specifically about San Luis Potosí. The state government in San Luis Potosí organized a large staging area to receive them. The Red Cross was there, and unlike the journey, the police was also there checking people in, going through their belongings, removing any weapons, which for the most part were knives. And the state government was providing bathrooms, showers, food, and water and shelter for the night. There were children who were ill. There were children who had chickenpox. They were quarantined. And the state officials had organized a one-night stay. Their objective was to have them move in for the night and then move them out the next day at 5 in the morning. The state governments were organized because they didn't want to have the same situation happen that had happened with the first wave of Central American caravan members that arrived in Tijuana, where 7,000 people arrived and the city was not prepared to house them, feed them, provide health care. So that was a chaotic situation. They wanted to avoid that. The group of people that arrived, the caravan, was divided into two different groups. They housed the men in one area and the women and children in another area. There were about 1,500 men, 250 women, 200 children, and some of the children had no shoes. I interviewed several people. They all said the same thing. They were going to the United States because they wanted to earn a living, could not do that at home, and they were escaping violence. But I should add that there is a subset of people involved that are participating in this group that are involved in drug trafficking, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, and other illegal activities. But a good portion of this group are amongst the poorest of the poor. They're unvaccinated. They have an average grade education of 6th grade education, and this is truly a humanitarian crisis. But since we are almost out of time, I want to share with you quickly a few pictures that I took. So the first picture struck me as very, very sad. This is a little girl holding a baby. She's about 10 to 12 years old. I don't believe the baby was hers. The next picture is a group of children that are on the ground that are being entertained by a Red Cross worker and a volunteer with crayons and coloring books. And they're right in front of the group of men that are checking in. The third picture is a large hall housing the men. They have all been given mats to sleep on. They've been given clothing too. The clothing has been provided by people in the community. People will donate the clothing to them. The fourth picture is the hall that is housing the women and the children. They're all in line to check in. And as you see, there are lots of children in that group. In the very last picture, I'm speaking with the State Secretary General who is in charge of this stop. So I'm very privileged to represent the United States at the United Nations and to help influence policy to address this humanitarian crisis. My work at the United Nations has forever changed my outlook. I don't think I'll ever look at the world the same again. So thank you, and I'm now going to open the floor to questions. I think we have a few minutes. Anybody have a question?
Have you found that any cultures are particularly resistant to female leadership, and have any of those outcomes surprised you?
Thank you. Well, I mean, yes, there are some cultures where women's roles are not considered to be the same as we see in Western society. One of the things that's been, I think, challenging for them, and not so much for me, because my sense is this is my position, and I'm the general counsel, and I'm the chief legal officer in the organization, and legal issues and legal opinions come from my office, and I do it to protect the organization. Some men in some areas where you see only men working, where they have women only sometimes in a kind of almost a token situation, where they will have one woman of the delegation, or the woman will be the translator, sometimes have trouble when we are engaging in discussions. Some of them will not look at me when I'm speaking. They'll look at the Secretary General. And for me, I find that doesn't deter me. It's like, I'm here, this is my position, this is the organization, and you have to deal with it. And if you don't like it, then there's something that you're gonna have to do to adjust. So, I mean, I think that's part of just what you do when you're there, and it's part of establishing your credibility, and also showing that you're a professional, and you're there to provide the advice and serve the needs of the organization. I have had, men with other women that I work with say things like, we like working with women because it makes it so much more enjoyable, because it's something that is so, you're all so attractive and we enjoy the opportunity. I mean, that happened, last year. And, things like that. So it's really working to in another environment, but helping at least them to recognize that women are here, women are in leadership, and they have to deal with it.
And that's supposed to be a compliment.
Yes, yes.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Mia, and I'm an admitted student, so I feel really lucky to be here and to listen to all of you. As I enter into law school and I start thinking about the kind of advocate I want to be and who I want to advocate for, the circumstances around homelessness and poverty that Nancy described raises a lot of questions for me, mainly about the discrepancy in spending and why the U.S. continues to spend so much more in defense rather than the people who are suffering at home. And I think it's really wonderful that we have Nancy and Mary sitting next to each other. And so Mary, when you are at Interpol and you see all of the different crimes around the world that hopefully the U.S. is involved in trying to prevent, what, to use Nancy's words, is the shift in spending and resources, eminently doable? And if we were to shift more of the spending to solving these kinds of problems, what kind of threats, if any, would this open us up to from abroad, but also at home? And I saw your eyebrows, raising as Nancy was discussing, and so I was hoping that you could speak more generally, maybe even specifically, about what those outcomes, potential outcomes, would look like. Thank you.
Well, I think this is one of those situations where, as Nancy was speaking, I was thinking, isn't UCLA a great place? Because I think that the fact that we can have people here with so many different perspectives, talking about so many different issues that affect everyone in different ways is I think what makes forums like this and makes this school, I think, so important, because you can really share your ideas without inhibition. My role at Interpol is limited. And so I have been working in Washington, though, for 30 years. And I am a career public servant. And for me, I'm not a political person. My position was not decided by politics or my politics. And that's one of the beauties that I've seen in working for public service and being a career public employee, is that when I started with the government, I think George Bush the first was the president, and I served through the Clinton administration, and I served through the second Bush administration and the Obama administration. And for me, it was always making sure that you accomplish the mission that you're supposed to accomplish, and making sure that you're providing the best public service for the public. The policymakers, and that's Congress, those are the ones that really determine how the spending in this country is decided and where the resources go. And you see the shifts that take place over the years in terms of what the political agendas are of the different administrations that are in place. And I've been in Washington, and I have seen some changes, but there's been some areas where things remain constant. And I think sometimes, certainly from my perspective, working in the Justice Department and working for criminal justice, there has always been this view that you always go after the criminals and the end result, and not enough is placed on prevention. But that's something I think that you see as a public servant, you see as an individual, but that's something that, to echo one of the things that Nancy said, is that this is something that you should ask the policymakers. And I feel very comfortable, and certainly in the fact that in the United States, and this is one thing that I advocate for at Interpol as well, we feel comfortable and free to speak our views and our opinions. And as a public servant, I have no fear and no concern about identifying areas that need to be addressed and at least trying to offer solutions. And at least showing from sometimes a very limited perspective, sometimes it's just like, I did extraditions with Mexico for many years. And many of the trafficking cases were, drug traffickers and major drug traffickers, and the problem was always the drug traffickers coming from Mexico. And our Mexican colleagues would say, well, there's always something you need to address, which is the demand. And so, we can't just go after the problem, we have to look at it holistically. And so it's been, for me, I think, a tremendous experience to be exposed to all of these issues, and then to know, where can you make a little bit of a difference, and where are the problems, and who can try to solve them. That's a huge, huge issue. But you look to the policymakers, and hopefully we have a voice in electing people who can at least advocate for interests that we consider important.
All right. So I think that was our last question. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists again. So,